This episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast with Jordan Raynor is presented by the Sports Spectrum Weekly Slant, our brand new football show. You can watch it, you can listen to it every single week during the football season. It's football, it's faith, it's the only show of its kind out there. And I'm so excited for this. And I hope you guys have checked out the episodes that have already been going on. We've talked to coaches and players, former players, current players. It has been fantastic to hear the Jesus stories of football players at the NFL level, the college level, heck, even the high school level. So it's been wonderful to do this show. I hope you all like it. It's called Sports Spectrum's Weekly Slant. It airs every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern on sportspectrum.com, on our YouTube channel, and on our Facebook channel. And you can stream it throughout the week. And heck, you could go back and watch all the episodes right now if you would like. But it's called Sports Spectrum's Weekly Slant. We're so excited about it. Please share it with others. Check it out and let us know what you think. It's football and it's faith. It's Sports Spectrum's Weekly Slant every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern at sportspectrum.com.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, former ESPN producer, Jason Romano.
And welcome to the show, guys. I am Jason. This is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We have a fantastic guest today. This guy is about as energetic and interesting of a person as we've had on this podcast. His name is Jordan Raynor. Now, Jordan is a serial entrepreneur. He's a best-selling author, national best-selling author, and has helped millions of Christians and believers around the world connect the gospel to their work. He has a podcast that's really good. He has devotionals. He has an email list, and he's got a bunch of books, including Called to Create and Master of One, and his newest book, Redeeming Your Time, 7 Biblical Principles for Being Purposeful, Present, and Wildly Productive. Jordan is also the executive chairman of Threshold 360, a venture-backed tech startup that has built the world's largest library of 360-degree virtual experiences of hotels, restaurants, and attractions. He's a highly sought-after speaker on the topic of faith. He's spoken at places like Harvard University, South by Southwest, many other events around the world, and he actually served in the White House under President George W. Bush. He's awesome. I mean, this was a guy I could have talked to for another hour. He has so much energy. He's got so many wonderful practical tips on being a believer in the workplace. And this includes the sports workplace. So if you're listening and you're thinking, well, what's the sports connection? This is all about the sports connection, especially for you coaches and you athletes that are listening and wondering, how does my work matter in a way that can be pleasing to Jesus? Man, Jordan Raynor has the answer. He's going to tell it to you right here, right now. I love this conversation. Jordan Raynor on Sports Spectrum. Jordan Raynor, welcome to Sports Spectrum, sir. How you doing, man?
I'm good, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you here, Jordan. And I got to start with this because you have now released 2 books in less than 2 years. And I've written a couple, and turning those around in that period of time, man, it's so difficult. What's the secret, Jordan? What do you got going on here? 2 books in less than 2 years.
Get ready, man. We're releasing 3 in the next 12 months, which is just bonkers. I'm just a glutton for punishment, I guess.
Well, congrats, first of all. Redeeming Your Time is out now. People are going to go check it out. And I'm excited for people to read it because I haven't finished it, but I've probably gotten through about 3/4 of it. It's fantastic and I love it. But I want to start, we'll go back to the book in a second because there's a particular chapter that I'm really intrigued by with this being a sports podcast. But I've been kind of fascinated with this work as worship, or the work mattering for believers in a place where maybe they're not in ministry, if you will, like technical ministry, like in a church setting. And I'm curious for you, like your story on when this became such a passion for you, because I think it's a very important topic, especially those in the sports space, because in most athletes and people who listen to this, coaches, they're in a secular world, right? Coaching and influencing people and probably thinking, well, what does this have to do in some cases with my faith? And why does this work truly matter in the grand scheme of things, not just the wins and losses? So what was it about this topic and this idea that was so appealing to you?
So, what you just described, that feeling of how a lot of Christian athletes feel, is exactly how I felt for years as a tech entrepreneur. I was 5 years into my career, sold my second company, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And when you sell two companies, the natural thing is you go start a third, right? Like that's just the thing you do. And so that was the plan. But somewhere along the way, I just started to feel guilty about that plan. I went to church one Sunday and heard this guy who was guest preaching talking about the need for people to go plant churches all around the world. And I just felt this very familiar guilt. How dare I, right? If I really love Jesus, I want to go start another business. I would go move to a mud hut 5,000 miles away from home and be a quote unquote full-time missionary. And by the grace of God alone, I had a mentor in my life pull me aside one day. And he's like, hey, I heard you're thinking about planting a church. And I was like, yeah. He's like, that sounds really dumb. And I was just like really taken aback. I was like, here's this guy who like leads Bible studies. What are you talking about? This is really dumb. He's like, Jordan, you're clearly a talented entrepreneur. You've created a lot of jobs, a lot of wealth. You clearly love it. Don't you get that your work as an entrepreneur is ministry? And I looked at this guy like he had three heads, right? And then he took me back to God's word and he showed me what all of us can see on the very first pages of our Bible, Genesis 1:1. Before God tells us that he is holy or loving or omnipotent, he tells us that he is a God who creates. He's a God who's productive. He's a God who works, right? And this is radical in the history of world religions. Every other religion said that the gods created human beings to work and serve the gods. Only Christianity starts with a God who works to serve us, right? And it's not just any work. He did blue collar work. Go to Genesis 2. It says that God planted a garden in the East. When Jesus came, he did blue collar work of a carpenter, right? I don't know how much more clearly the God of the Bible can say to you and to me, whether you're an athlete or a carpenter or an entrepreneur, your work is not just good, it is God-like. And that message changed my life, dude. Changed my life.
Wow. So why do so many struggle with that in the work that you've done and the books that you've written? I mean, even for me, 17 years at a place like ESPN, I struggled with it for many years. I always thought my work and my job at ESPN was completely separate from my journey of faith. I thought I go to church on Sundays and I go to Bible study during the week and I pray and maybe read my Bible. But when I go to work, that's my job. Now, I know the difference now, but I'd love for you to kind of share what you've seen in the work that you've done and why so many struggle.
Let's get a bit theological here because I do think this is the root of the answer. It's because we have truncated the gospel in the last 200 years of church history. Here's what I mean by that. Go into any church today and ask somebody, hey, what's the gospel of Jesus Christ? And they would say, it's the good news that Jesus came to die and save me from my sins, right? It's hyper individualistic. It's all about me, saving me from my sins, right? And it's woefully incomplete. If you went back more than 200 years in church history and gave that answer to another Christian, they would look at you back. That's all you have to say to me, right? Like the gospel is this big story that starts in Genesis 1 before sin, that shows us a God who works and calls us to work as human beings, as his image bearers, before sin entered the world, right? Work was a part of perfect Eden before sin. So that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is fall, right? But the fall did not just break our individual standing with God. It broke every single part of fallen creation, including making our work difficult, right? Ushering in the need for chapter 3 of this gospel, which is Jesus coming as our Redeemer. But here's the deal, and here's what I want all of our listeners to see. At the resurrection, that first Easter Sunday, it was perfectly within God's power to bring his kingdom in full on Easter Sunday. But he didn't.
Right.
Jesus just inaugurated it and left the work of cultivating the final creation to us. So how do we do that through our work? We do it as entrepreneurs when we fix what's broken in creation. We do it when athletes crush it on the court as a means of revealing the character of a God who created them to be extraordinary, right? We do it by just gardening with Jesus the gardener. I love that he appears to Mary Magdalene as a gardener at the resurrection, as a means of winking to Genesis 1, saying, hey, it's time to garden again. It's time to fix what we broke in the Garden of Eden and create for the eternal garden city that we're all working towards.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating thing to think about, because I just still think that a lot of people don't see themselves as, it's an identity issue in some cases too, as a follower of Christ who happens to work at this place. It's kind of the other way around. And so they're identified by their work, right? And I remember you had Daryl Strawberry on your podcast, The Call to Mastery. And, you know, Daryl is great at preaching the gospel, as we talked about beforehand. But you asked him, like, would he do anything different if he had been sold out and loving Jesus while he was still playing baseball? And he said he would have done more to build the kingdom, which I loved. But I think a lot of people think, okay, I am still a baseball player, or I'm still an ESPN producer, or I'm still an author who happens to be a Christian. You know, we have this real identity issue with a lot of athletes to see themselves first as follower of Christ, and then their work really does matter because it's for a greater purpose. Have you seen that?
Totally. So I'll just point you to Ephesians 2, 8 through 10, right? Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, right, tells us that we are saved by faith alone, not by works, so that nobody can boast. So we're not saved by our works. But then Paul goes on to say in verse 10, that the very purpose of our salvation, he says, we are created in Christ Jesus for good works that the Father prepared in advance for us. Now, here's the problem. A lot of us hear verses like that and say, well, good works means sharing the gospel with others. And sure, of course, that is a good work. But I've studied this word deeply. It's a Greek word called ergon that both Paul and Jesus use, that we translate to good works. And the meaning, according to my biblical concordance of this Greek word ergon, is, quote, work, task, and employment, right? What Paul and Jesus were saying is, hey, listen, the purpose of your salvation is just to go to work and do your work with excellence, with love of others, in accordance with God's word. And that in and of itself is good and honors the Father. We just over spiritualize so much in the church today, thinking that our work only matters if we're sharing the gospel. And don't get me wrong, of course we should be looking for opportunities to do that. But that is far from the only way that our work brings glory to God.
Yeah, I completely agree. How is this received? Well, I guess it's two questions. So let's ask it, because I got reprimanded for this by asking two questions as one question and expecting you to answer both questions. So I'm trying to follow my own teaching here. Let me ask, the first question is, how is this received by people who aren't Christians? Yeah. Because you are a serial entrepreneur and you're in this space with a lot of people, as I was, who aren't followers of Christ or think differently. So how is this model, or maybe they don't even read it, I don't know, but how is this model received by many who aren't believers?
I'll tell you what, I've had a lot of non-believers who have read my books on this topic. And while they still have questions about Jesus, and some of them aren't fully there that Jesus is Lord, all of them agree that this vision, this biblical vision of work, is incredibly attractive to them, right? Because I think there's something deep inside all of us that knows that work is good, inherently good. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's difficult. But we've all had those days where we've just taken a step back away from home plate after hitting a grand slam, right? Or finishing a draft of a book, just like, oh man, I want work to feel like that forever. And the biblical narrative is that longing is right. Number one, because God himself works. And number two, our promise of heaven is so much more than just ethereal playing harps in the clouds. Our promise is a new earth completely restored by Jesus. And Isaiah says in Isaiah 65 that we'll work on the new earth forever, but work will be perfect again. That is a very appealing message to the unbelievers.
Yeah, it's very attractive. And so the second part of that question was going to be, how is this received by people who are in true ministry?
Yes. Yeah.
Who are pastors and others who don't know in some ways. Maybe they do. Maybe it's an experience like mine, but for many have been pastors for years and years and years. They don't understand maybe what it's like to work in a secular environment and see their work as valuable in a place that's not ministry. But how is this being received in the ministry world or the church world?
What I've been saying so far in this 20-minute conversation sounds radical. And yet I've never heard a pastor disagree with me on any of this stuff. In fact, we have 15,000 pastors alone who are on my email list that get my weekly devotionals. They thank me because they understand that it's going to take people that look like Jason Romano and Jordan Raynor, who have worked outside of the four walls of the church to be championing this message. Because, by the way, pastors have been saying this forever. Yes. Martin Luther was saying this. John Calvin was saying this. Jesus of Nazareth and the Apostle Paul have been saying this, right? But in the last 100 years or so, it's been largely academics saying this stuff. It's been largely pastors who don't understand what it's like to work at ESPN. And so the pastors I come in contact with are like, dude, we need 100 Jordan Raynors and Jason Romanos helping the church rediscover the biblical narrative of work. This isn't new theology. If it was new, it should be greatly suspect, right? It's ancient. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to help others rediscover what God's word has said all along about the eternal significance of our work.
Yeah, it's a necessary message that we all need reminding of. Jordan Raynor is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. Redeeming Your Time, 7 biblical principles for being purposeful, present, and wildly productive is available now. You can go get it everywhere books are found. I was really intrigued, being a sports guy, and certainly this being a sports and faith podcast, with chapter 4 of the book, where it's called Redeeming Your Time, as it focuses on Basketball Hall of Famer Tamika Catchings. And I know you had her on your podcast as well. I have not listened to that one yet, but talking about prioritizing your yeses, that's actually the name of the chapter. Tell us about Tamika, why you included her story and how that might relate to our listeners.
Yeah, great. Happy to. So real quick, this book, Redeeming Your Time, is all about the 7 timeless time management principles that I think we could see in the life of Christ, in the gospel biographies, right? We forget, we always approach the gospels for their theology and their ethics. We forget that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are biographies of how the most productive person of all time lived his life, right? That's right. One of those things that jumps off the pages is Jesus prioritized his yeses. Jesus didn't say yes to everything. Go look at Mark chapter 1. He said no to good things like healing people in order to focus on his most essential work, which is preaching the gospel in word and deed. And my good friend Tamika Catchings is a great example of what this looks like. So if you don't know, Tamika is arguably the greatest women's basketball player of all time.
She's a legend.
She's a legend. And when Tamika was a kid, I think she was in the 7th grade, her family was talking about what the kids wanted to do when they got older. And Tamika just said point blank, she's like, I didn't have to think about it. She's like, I'm going to be in the NBA. And this is before the WNBA, of course, was a thing. No woman had ever been in the National Basketball Association, but she's like, no, I'm going to play in the NBA like my dad did. And so what she did, she wrote this down. One day I'm going to be in the NBA, put it on a Post-it note, stuck it to her bathroom mirror when she was in the 7th grade. And the point I make with the story is because Tamika Catchings was so crystal clear on what she wanted, what she was saying yes to professionally, it made it a lot easier for her to say no to lesser things. I talk to a lot of people who struggle with saying no to requests for their time. And usually it's because they don't have a burning yes in their life. There's nothing that's really firing them up that they've said yes to, like being in the NBA one day, right? And so we've all got to learn to do what Tamika did, to do what Jesus of Nazareth did, get really clear on what he was saying yes to so that we can focus on our most essential work and prioritize our to-do lists.
How do you find that essential yes if you don't have it?
Yeah.
For me, I always had it. Like my essential yes was broadcasting, sports. I wanted to do everything I could to end up in a career in broadcasting. I didn't know it would end up at ESPN, but I wanted to do that. So I had this yes and this priority for many, many years that I focused on. And I still have that yes in some ways, just in a different way with what we're doing now. But a lot of people just are working and have a job and trying to pay bills, and they don't have that yes. Is there a secret formula here to try and find that for so many? They might have a passion for their favorite sports team and watching a game on Sunday, but how does that turn into this, big time yes that they can go after?
Yeah. So I'll say a couple things. Number one, I would challenge Christ followers to be known for the size of their goals. Right? We are still a long ways away from heaven being fully on earth, right? There's a lot of work left to do. And thus, we ought to be taking the biggest swings, because Ephesians 3:20 tells us God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, because he's the one working through us, right? So that's the first thing I'll say. Second thing I'll say is, if you don't know what that is for you, your work, your life, I would just encourage you to do a lot of experimentation vocationally, try a lot of things till you find the thing that's clearly your thing. And if you already know what it is, but there's no unifying goal that's focusing your to-do list, spend a lot of time journaling. I know that sounds crazy, but Dwight D. Eisenhower, I'm a big fan of presidential history. Eisenhower spent a ton of time writing in order to think. And I found that for me, if my thoughts are unclear, I'm not sure what that big burning yes is for one of my callings in my life. The thing that's most clarifying is when I just write, not for anybody, but myself, right? In a journal, me talking with the Lord, Lord, what are you doing in this world? Where are you working? And how can I be a part of it? And just writing open-ended to that end clarifies my thinking quite a bit.
Yeah. And usually God, I would say always, God answers that and reveals that pretty clearly. You just got to kind of be looking for it and have your, what does it say? He who has ears to hear and eyes to open, like be listening and be watching and be knowing if you're expecting God to do something, he's going to do it. The door is going to open. It's just got to be a matter of which door it is to walk through. You mentioned presidential history, and it's funny because I'm reading your bio and I'm going through, and kind of almost second nature, it just says, oh, hey, I served in the White House, or you served in the White House with President George W. Bush. And I'm like, that would be like the very first thing at the top. Hey, look what I got to do. Look who I got to hang out with. What was that? Because that's interesting to me. I'd love for you to kind of share what that experience was.
It was awesome. So actually, this relates to what we were just talking about Christians taking bigger swings. Okay. When I was in college, I was a public relations major at Florida State. And I don't know, I probably had 30 classmates in my graduating class at Florida State within this program. And all of them were competing over the same 5 internships in Tallahassee, right? They were all applying for the same internships at the same PR firms, the same communications agencies. And I just said, you know what? I'm a big fan of the West Wing. I think the White House has interns. I'm just going to apply for a White House internship, right? And I got it, to my shock. And when I went to Washington, I thought, oh man, my colleagues at the White House are just going to be so much smarter than my colleagues at Florida State. Yeah, not so much. The difference was they were more audacious, right? They just took bigger swings and set bigger goals. So yes, I did a 4-month internship at the Bush White House in the fall of 2006. Incredible experience. I worked in the White House Office of Political Affairs. And my job was essentially to write full-time. I wrote political briefings that my boss would then take to brief the president, vice president, first lady on Air Force One whenever they would travel around the country. And it was unbelievable. Looking back on it, it's absurd. The country is run by 20-year-olds, right? Like it's a little scary.
Are you, in your role, are you involved directly where you're meeting and spending time with the president? Or
zero
is it
time. Zero time. One time. So there was this one time where the president, vice president every semester take a photo with the intern class. And so they did. And I told my boss, I was like, man, I really want to have a good question to ask the president just in case he stays behind and takes questions. And my boss is like, he won't, he never does. But he did. He stayed behind to answer our questions. So we spent about an hour with President Bush talking about some just wild stuff. It was a great time. Great time.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it's hard to find any time. I mean, you might get 5 minutes with any president, and that's way more than you'd ever expect. And you get that. So that's a pretty awesome experience there, cool. Jordan Raynor. Again, the new book is called Redeeming Your Time, 7 Biblical Principles for Being Purposeful, Present, and Wildly Productive. Book is out now. As we wind down, I don't think we even asked you this. What's your testimony? Like, did you grow up in a Christian church and in the Christian faith and kind of accept Christ as a kid? Because I know for a lot of people who do that, they still have to kind of come to a point where they make Christ the Lord of their life as they get older. What's your testimony?
Yeah. So I was the first generation Christian in my family by the grace of God alone. My parents were Catholic in name only, and for some reason sent me to a Christian school. And I came home when I was 7 years old and told my parents I had asked Jesus to come into my heart. And my dad got pissed. He's like, what kind of brainwash?
What does that even mean?
What does that even mean? And it was hilarious. And thank God, through the ministry of that school, both my parents and my brother also came to know the Lord. Amazing. But listen, I stayed at that Christian school for 13 years, but my faith didn't become serious until college, when it had to become serious, when I had to make that choice for myself. And so really, I tell people, ask me all the time, like, oh, who's most influenced your faith? Was it a pastor, a parent? Like, honestly, it was Tim Keller, and just reading his books all through college and just crushing everything he ever read. Keller helped me see the depth and the breadth of the gospel in a way I never had before. And in a lot of ways, it's part of the reason why I'm doing the work I'm doing today, because I believe the gospel influences our work deeply, right? And the way that we work. Yeah.
That's a great story, a great testimony. Tim Keller, thank you, right? I'm sure he's gotten thank yous from many people. His books are amazing. And obviously we're praying for him and as he battles in his health issues right now. Last question. And it's a question we ask all of our guests. I'm curious for you too, because you're writing things that God can teach you what he's got to teach you every day. But I feel like the Lord impresses upon our hearts different things at different times. Today, where you are, and you got this new book out, and obviously a lot of the great things happening for you. What is the lesson that the Lord has been kind of showing you and teaching you, either whether it's today or over the past couple months or this past year and a half? What's God been showing you?
He's been teaching me, listen, when you're in book launch mode, or if you're an athlete and you're in the World Series, it's go time, right? Yes, and it's so tempting to make the result of our work the source of our self-worth. And so he's been teaching me what I tell my kids every single night. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an almost 2-year-old. And every night before I put them to bed, I say, hey, kids, Daddy loves you no matter how many bad things you do. And they say, yeah. I was like, I also love you no matter how many good things you do. And they say, yeah. I say, who else loves you like that? And they say, Jesus. We've got to hear those words. I have to hear those words spoken over my work. The God of the universe loves me regardless of how productive or unproductive I am, no matter how many wins I get, no matter how many losses I have. And that enables me to rest. But paradoxically, it's also the thing that leads me to be even more ambitious for my work, not because I need to get something from the Father, but because I want to hit a grand slam just to make him happy. Right. That's what I am relearning day by day as I'm in crazy book launch mode.
What a great message for your kids too. Like, just to remind them of that. Where did you get that idea? Because I think a lot of parents struggle. Where'd that come from?
All right. So I'm really good at tracking my sources on stuff.
I hope so.
For some reason, this one, I know I stole it from someone. I have no idea where I got it from, though. Wow. I've looked all throughout Evernote. So if you're listening, be like, Jordan stole that from me. Shoot me an email. Let me know. I'd love to give you credit in the future.
That's right. Well, go get his books. You said you got 3 in 12 months here. I'm imagining Master of One Redeeming Your Time. You got the children's book, your first book, Call to Create. The new one that's out now, Redeeming Your Time, is the one that we want people to go get. Also, listen to your podcast, The Call to Mastery, which is a pretty great show. And lots of good things happening, Jordan. Thanks for sharing a little bit of it with us here on the show. And all the best to you next time. We'll have you on and we'll talk some more.
Sounds good, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Super thankful for Jordan Raynor. So glad he took the time out to join us here on Sports Spectrum. As he mentioned, he's in full book promotion mode, as he should be, because writing books are very hard. And when you spend time writing a book, you want a lot of people to read it. I know that's how I felt with my 2 books, and I certainly know Jordan wants that with his book. So I'm telling you to go read his new book, Redeeming Your Time, 7 Biblical Principles for Being Purposeful, Present, and Wildly Productive. It is available everywhere books are found. It makes a great gift for that holiday idea that you're thinking about. Okay, what book can I buy for somebody around this Christmas time that I can share with them, that can help them, especially the person who's a believer in your life, who's doing work that maybe they don't feel is mattering? Well, this is a great book for them. Redeeming Your Time, 7 Biblical Principles for Being Purposeful, Present, and Wildly Productive. Thanks to Jordan Raynor for being here today on Sports Spectrum. We appreciate you and thank you as well for tuning in. Please join us next time for another episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. If you like what you heard, make sure you click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. We got almost 1,000 episodes, somebody told me, out there. So there's plenty of archival content to go back and listen to, but that way you never miss any of the episodes that we continue to release with different coaches and athletes and people like Jordan Raynor, and conversations that bring Jesus into the sports world, into the sports conversation. So click that subscribe button, click that like button so that you don't miss any episodes. And make sure you check out our website as well for all of our content, sportspectrum.com. All of our free content is available there, devotionals and podcasts and articles and stories, updated daily and available for free at sportspectrum.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time here on the show. Have a great rest of your day.